Okay, three, two, one. So we begun, and this week we have a bit of a doozy episode. It was a bit late because I think this week's book deserves that bit of recognition. This was quite an interesting book, Manufacturing Consent by the one and only Noam Chomsky. And uh, Anup, before I
Edward
ask
S.
for your
Herman.
opinion, I just want to say that this book comes with a lot of historical context, right? And then I personally actually did some cross-checking just because I didn't want to consent to Chomsky while
Mhm.
reading about manufacturing consent. So
Yeah.
yeah, it took quite a bit of time, but it was a very good read. And how do you feel? How do you like it?
It was really nice. By the way, let's also give credit to the second author, like Edward S. Herman was his name,
Edward S.
right?
Herman, yeah, correct.
Exactly. So no, because these last 2 weeks I was also explaining some of my other friends that I read this book, and would always only credit Chomsky, right? Chomsky,
Mm,
right? But it was not only him who wrote this book, right?
exactly.
So yeah. Actually, Chomsky is like a really famous person. Like even in computer science, he has actually like done a lot of stuff. So
Okay.
there is this thing called Chomsky normal form.
Okay.
That's a language theoretic property,
Okay.
and it is like it comes in theoretical computer science. When you do parser and all that stuff. So
Mm,
really awesome person.
yeah.
And after reading this book, like I found Chomsky, but also Edward S. Herman, whom I didn't know of before.
Mm,
Like really awesome. So for me, it was really, really interesting, pretty lengthy, but
mm,
nevertheless super interesting until the end, right?
yeah.
And I think I skimmed a lot of the part, because I wanted to finish this like in 1 week,
Mm,
but I will definitely read it like multiple times. I
yeah.
think so. Yeah, this was the first read, and it was super awesome. I found. How did you
Yeah.
like it?
For me as well, it was quite interesting. I know Chomsky more from my left-leaning political opinions, right? Normally, I used to be a right-leaning person, a strong, staunch capitalist, but after finding Chomsky and reading some of the ideas that he presents and
Mhm.
his intellectual insights on different topics kind of made me sympathize with him more. So that's how I
Mhm.
got to know him. And then later on, I found that he was actually a father of modern linguists or something because I was going through one of those YouTube iceberg videos. I don't know if you're aware about the YouTube iceberg videos, but it's basically a video where people go from the most relevant topic to most niche topic in a certain
Mhm.
topic. And I was just listening about linguistics, and Noam Chomsky kept coming up and up again, and I was like,
Mhm.
who's this guy, right? You hear him in political talks as well, you hear him in linguistics as well, and then I googled him and figured that he had actually written this seminal book. That is what
Mhm.
was said by Al Jazeera. This is a seminal book, and I think it was indeed a seminal book. It was a completely different framing of
Mhm.
popular mass media that we speak about. Uh, I think this book actually deserves a Anup summary. How would you summarize this?
um, yeah, I mean, like this is also a non-fiction book, right? So
Yeah.
I think like we can go chapter wise. In the first phase we have like a preface, right, which is pretty lengthy. So
Yeah.
actually I didn't know that I was reading the preface the whole time. But after I finished it, then like I saw chapter one, and I was like, oh, okay, here we go, right?
Yeah.
So in the beginning, he starts saying us about American continent. Like how the mass media there are actually, let's say, twisting the truth or like viewing it from a different viewpoint. Or suppressing certain facts about
Mm,
certain countries such as Nicaragua,
mm,
El Salvador, and Guatemala, right? Like those three
yeah.
were initially in focus. And later on, we go to all the conflicts that we had during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right?
Yeah.
Like with Vietnam, then came Laos, and then came Cambodia. How, like, the major mass media news channels such as CBS News, Times Week,
Yeah.
and New York Times.
Yeah.
how they actually portray certain facts, right? So
Yep.
in some cases you have like a genocide of 50 people, and in some cases you have like, I don't know, a casualty of 3 million people, you know. So
Yep.
it is yeah, you definitely see like why a linguist is touching upon these topics, right?
Yeah.
How, what you can do with language and
Exactly.
everything. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. From my point of view, I found the book to be kind of have a flow, right? First,
Mm,
Chomsky had this history of newspaper and how it started, and how, uh, despite in England, there were a lot of working class newspaper. They all at the end ended up being run by a monopoly of sorts, and he gives a really good example of why this phenomena happens, and it makes
mm,
perfect sense. And
mm,
because the newspaper historically and still today are hugely advertisement driven, uh, mass media, they are
mm,
always subject to the advertisers' interest, and then they start censoring from the advertisement interest as well. And later on, once they become more, I would say, national, and then have greater reach, then they come under the magnifying glass of the government themselves. The government,
mm,
which wants to, for their own, the leadership's best interest, want to uh, manipulate the mass to have sympathetic uh, opinions towards them. And I really liked his assessment that most of the local news, he goes this towards the end as well, but at the start as well, he says that most of the local news are probably much more non-suspect to this configuration towards the governmental requirements. But once you become a national news or even an international news, then there's higher onus for you to subscribe to the governmental talking points and the governmental norms and the ideas as such. And I think the first chapter itself sets up the whole book in a, it's a really interesting take on mass media, and it was unbelievably fascinating.
mm.
Yeah.
One thing that actually I now remembered again was like this transition, right, where you have local news channel who were actually targeting working class people,
Yeah.
right? They also used to sell newspaper back in the days, you know, but it seemed like the advertising, like companies who wanted their product to advertise, they would go for this newspaper who actually were not focusing on the working class, right?
No, no, no.
And these advertisers, they actually also paid like a lot of money to this press,
Yeah.
so their production cost just sank down, right? So
Yeah.
this would result to like this advertising based newspaper to
Mm,
be sold on lower price than like the working class press, right?
exactly.
Which actually led to this let's say extinction of this working class newspapers, right? That was
Yeah.
super interesting, you know, like to see it through that lens, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed that, but I for sure saw parallels with regards to YouTube as well. So YouTube towards
Mhm.
the start was, I would say, more internet friendly. Like a random dude would be making contents and it would be going viral. You would see
Mhm.
like people with shaky cameras, gray footage, like grainy footages, and with their own interesting takes, have millions of views. But over time, the production cost goes higher and higher. And these days, I think it's the only well organized, highly invested YouTube channels that really succeed.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
those channels which don't adjust accordingly are kind of left behind because the advertisers are not interested in them, and
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
cannot retain views when their competitions have higher production costs. And I think that's something that you can see, that every time there's a new technology, there's a real grab for power for everybody else. Everybody
Mhm.
wants
Mhm.
expertise in them, and there are only few who grasp it. Sadly enough, oftentimes the few who are able to uh, garner any kind of viewership are really motivated by the idea of having a single entity control the information or control the resources. And the working class people who don't really are too ambitious, who are probably more willing to share what they have, are left behind. And you can see that in any kind of mass media, which would be YouTube and other internet medias these days.
Funny thing is, like, he also told that in the interview that I sent him before, like this 30 minutes interview where he actually debates, not debates, has an interview with the BBC reporter, right? Like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was back in the days, like during 1980s, right, where he
Mm-hmm.
did that interview, and he was also asked about internet, and he also says the same thing. So right now, so basically 20, 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it was accessible for everyone, so you didn't have that kind of monopoly kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then, like, he said, like Chomsky said, like at that time already, that maybe later on there will be like some major players who will control the internet, right? So I think
Yeah.
like that's what we're seeing right now, right?
Yeah. Exactly, and you can see a lot of censorship, and I like how Chomsky differentiates between a proper censorship inside a dictatorship and self-censorship inside a so quote unquote democratic countries, where he's kind of distinguishing, especially in case of US, because US is the global
Mm,
hegemon right now, and how they have tentacles all over the world, and how
mm,
they but US at the end of the day has to uh, uh, satisfy their local people, because the next election somebody might get kicked out of power, and so they try
mm,
to convince the people back home to maintain their international hegemony. And these days you can actually see it kind of unravel under Trump, and how they are getting rid of this USAID and other soft, I would say,
mm,
power resources, soft power tools. But
mm,
still, over the years, the media has been able to gather enough sympathies for it.
mm, 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 mm,
And yeah,
mm,
I like the next two chapters as well. I think they go hand in hand. One is the victims of those that you should sympathize with and those you should not. That
mm.
one was very
How
interesting.
were they called again? Called again? I don't know. Like, what kind of victims were they called again?
I forgot the name, the specific
Mm,
word, but it's
mm.
basically worthy and unworthy
Worthy,
victims.
exactly, worthy victims and unworthy victims, right? So he distinguishes between like client states of US and enemy states
Exactly,
of US, right? Like where
exactly.
El Salvador and Guatemala are like client states,
Yeah,
and things are not working like as it should there.
yeah,
To be honest, like I actually heard about some news of El Salvador, right?
yeah.
But Guatemala, like, and also in which extent like the atrocities were done there, like that
Mm-mm.
was crazy.
Yeah.
um
I actually
and he also
looked that part up in the internet, and I found out that the Mayan people that we talk about so often.
mm, mm,
Yeah,
mm,
so like most of the civilization, they transformed over time, and they had taken a modern form under the Spanish rule, right?
yeah,
But in Guatemala, under the puppet government of US, they conducted a mass genocide of the Mayan group. Almost 200 to 300,000 were killed. But I would suggest people to look this up on their own. I might get the numbers wrong.
it's crazy, right? Like that all of these people, like as soon as they actually start like controlling the government, they go after the civilians, aka the farmers of the societies, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that was quite interesting, and I actually started noticing this stuff on the internet now. Every time I read a news, and I become this highly critical. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
while reading this book, I think there was an event where I was so now, because I read this, I don't always check one news source. I always check different news source, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it showed about this current war in Israel and the current war in Ukraine, and then how the languages are so different. For example, BBC was criticizing Russia for closing, because the schools were closed for over 1 or 2 years, or the schools had to be closed because of bombing, whereas in
Mm-hmm.
Gaza the schools have not been open for the last 2 years, and the narratives are completely different of how they are written
Mm-hmm.
about. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, once you read this book, you kind of start noticing. I'm kind of surprised that this book has not been banned already by the government.
Yes, it's crazy. It is also like, I think, the Orwellian book
Yep,
1984, right? I
yep,
think like while 1984 was a fictionist book, like this
yep,
is what you have in the real world, right?
yep,
Like,
yeah,
and that book is also banned in certain countries, and I can
yep.
imagine this book is banned in certain countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine this book to be banned in probably US and even Germany and countries like these where they have the quote unquote democratic system. Because at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, this book is criticizing a democratic system, so probably wouldn't be banned in dictatorships like China or Russia. But
Mm-hmm.
uh,
But but that I don't know, because in Germany, even the book such as Mein Kampf,
mhm,
like from Hitler itself, is not banned.
okay,
So like people think that it was banned before, but actually it seems like it was not banned at all. Like
okay,
by neither of time, some kind of form of it was banned, I think, but
hmm,
like the book as such, was still available.
yeah,
So you could go through that book. It seems.
hmm,
So maybe it's also. I mean, like if you start banning something, then people are like even more
yeah,
eager to read.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
even like, okay, what's written there?
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
have a look on it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Um.
I also like the other chapters where he speaks about the elections in Nicaragua and El Salvador and so on. And I think he's using these cases as a bit of a forecast of how it's going to accumulate, because I think the thesis of this whole book is towards the Vietnam War and how the consent was manufactured and how at the end it was media which resulted in the downfall, but not really the media which was in the downfall, and the
Yeah.
dissenting voices within the government was the reason why it ended up the Vietnam War ended up uh, being stopped. Normally people say US was defeated, but I would not say US was defeated, because if you lose
Yeah.
more than a million people, then you didn't really win anything. There's a lot of loss of life.
And I mean, like, if you lose a war, like now the rules are something like you pay for the reparation and like
Exactly.
reconstructing the country that won the war, right?
Yeah.
So and US actually didn't do that in Vietnam.
Mm.
Like they did the exact opposite thing, right? So
Yeah, exactly. And uh, yeah, this is indeed a really interesting book. Uh, and you see a lot of uh, use even today uh, in the news cycles these days, that there are different kinds of narratives being set. Uh, I read somewhere where there's a bombing. I think it's the news today, and then the bombing was reported as uh, nothing so big because it was done by one of the allies of the US. Whereas if there was a bombing even with no casualties done by Russia, then it's reported as something travesty, which
definitely.
as a pacifist I don't condone for any of them. I wish there were no bombing at all, and probably all disputes can be figured out by a game of football or probably a game of chess, or you do like a triathlon, three sport games, something like that. But yeah, this is also one thing that after reading this book, really made me notice is that uh, the media really tries to instill opinion inside the people, because recently there was an attack on Kashmir, and then the news cycle was already about trying to return violence with violence rather than first finding the perpetrator and then trying to try them through the rule of law. So oftentimes the media, I think, because the government wants to pressurize the people, that they are doing it. But I don't really know. I'm just a stupid guy who read a book and found news that might be related to this. I'm I don't recommend anybody to take my opinion with any kind of value.
Yeah, I think like now if I see a certain news article, like I have to think and then rethink again, like what I should
Exactly.
think about it,
Yeah.
what the main intention is, who the allies are, who the enemies are,
Exactly.
and what's actually going on. But the thing that you told before, last time me and a friend we were also discussing about this. So if the mass media in Germany, let's say, like
Yeah,
is propagandizing something, okay,
yeah,
um, then like as I told before, right, like I look at the same scene from the leftist press and also from the rightist press,
yes.
right? Now, I was thinking like maybe the hope is that it kind of averages and you kind of get into the balance, right?
Mm-mm.
But now, what if like you have like more bias embedded to you? You know what I mean? So basically, you have
Yep,
like now the right bias and the left bias.
yep.
Is it like really balancing, or like are you getting like triggered to these extremes? In their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're trying to say. I, I think the key to that is you go in with an open mind, right? Even if you go read at the right-wing sources and then you read them and then you say, okay, probably there's whatever they are saying is correct. And then you read to the
Mm-hmm.
left-wing sources and say, okay, probably whatever they are saying is correct. And then probably you go back to primary sources if it's really close to your heart, right? You go to the primary sources, and with the onset of TikTok and social media, one good thing is that there is a lot of videographic evidence of things happening on the internet, and I think this is a good thing about having TikTok as a uh, contemporary of Facebook or Instagram, because while the Facebook Instagram is in the sphere of influence of US, TikTok is not necessarily in the same influence, so you can actually get I would say uh, adversarial reporting of US policies in TikTok, while you will probably get adversarial reporting of China's policies on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or any of those sites. So,
I get it. I get it, but I think there's an issue with that. While these medias are like showing certain facts,
mm,
people are much more able to express now. The reason that in Germany right now, in this election especially, the AfD Alternative for Germany party had
mm,
actually that much votes was because these politicians were really present in TikTok. So a
yeah,
lot of young people got had access to that.
yep,
And all not only the AfD but also the Linke, like the
yep,
leftists in Germany, they
yep,
also got some voters because of TikTok itself.
yep,
So it seems while you have access to information, you
mm,
rather tend to go to the extremes
yep,
using this kind of media.
yep. Yeah, I
So
think at the end
yeah.
it comes down to a literacy of people. For example, normally uh, these things probably need to be taught at the high school level when you're at your grade 11 or 12, right? About how
Mhm.
you interpret media along with, I think, scientific method, because in the current state of world, I think that's something missing, that people are often very skeptical of science itself, and I think it comes from a distrust of media, because normally a scientist discovers something, but he is hyped by the media itself, and when there is a distrust
Mhm.
for media, then there's a distrust for science because they don't really trust the science that is being reported by the media themselves. So I think people really need to be educated on how to be savvy with the media information they get, and
Mhm.
also try to uh, teach at least young adults of how to interpret news, try to seek for multiple sources and so on. If you really want
Mhm.
a good democracy with informed citizenry, I mean,
Mhm.
for people in power, they don't necessarily want that situation because the status quo is serving them, and they would probably want that to be how it is.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
But
I get your point.
this is a really good book, right? It kind of makes you not really enjoy so yeah, not really enjoy reading it, in the sense it questions your understanding of mass media and how to
Mhm.
consume it. But I
Yeah.
think this uncomfortable conversations you need to have it in. I think Chomsky and Herman did a really really good job with this.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of parts where I was shaking my head. I was like, oh shit. Also, like this, not I would not say a rebellion gang, but like there was this thing called GAM, right? Like GAM or something in Guatemala or El Salvador, like where they started like not even as like as peaceful protesters, where
mm,
suddenly, they would like just go after like these people leading it,
mm,
killing them, and pulling the nail out of a baby and stuff like that, and
mm,
mutilating these people,
yeah,
so it was like really graphic, but
yeah.
yeah, I mean,
The book is also
sadly
very
the world is graphic, right?
yeah, yeah. The book is also very academic, if you ask. There's a lot of citations all over the place, and sometimes I actually just clicked it and checked it. Easy just putting bullshit citations there, but
Mhm,
they were quite genuine, and it's a I would say it's an academic piece that is
mhm,
more accessible to people, and everybody should at least read it once to better inform themselves. You would start seeing news completely different way since then.
mhm.
And
Like,
I just wanted to add that when I was a kid at home, right, there were a few Nepali channels, and my parents would
mhm,
always say like, ah, this channel is deviated towards this political party, the other channel is deviated
mhm,
towards that political party, and I would never understand that, right? I'd always be like, how can a TV channel be deviated towards a certain
mhm,
political party? And then after reading this book and then going through some of the other channels which are more accessible right now, like CNN, Fox News, and the headlines, I felt
mhm.
like, okay, probably there's some uh, knowledge. So yeah, my parents were not just as stupid as I thought they were.
Um, Look, like last time, because we are in this Netflix context, okay, I had a talk with a friend of mine actually
Mm,
yesterday, right, where I
mm,
was like telling him about this book, and he was telling me, yeah, this is actually happening in Nepal right now.
yeah,
So like this protest of the monarch's
yeah,
party, right? Like they
exactly.
vandalized a lot of stuff,
Yeah,
but it seems like even in their fractions itself, like people were hurt, right?
yeah,
But the media was focusing on these people vandalizing other people, other stuff, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
even like though these people were shot, that was not in the focus. That
yeah,
was focused just only after 2 weeks, right?
yeah, yeah,
After the vandalizing stuff, so
yeah,
the media wanted to kind of like, and I mean, I was one of those people. Like the media wanted to kind of provoke the
yeah,
society, and
yeah,
like let them see like, okay, these people are like destroying like everything,
yeah,
and to be honest, they got me with that, because I saw the videos, I heard about the report that a
yeah,
journalist was burned in
yeah,
his house,
yeah.
and it certainly, yeah, angered me, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you can see it all over. If, for example, the mayor of Kathmandu himself
mm,
uses media in a very savvy way. Even
yeah,
before election, there was, I would say, I don't know if there was a formal, but at least an informal uh, correlationship between Palan and the routine of Nepal Bandha, which is one of the largest media platform right now for Nepali news,
mm,
and it's also one of the
mm,
most trusted news as well. So
mm, mm,
uh, it I see that most people recognize the role of media for grabbing power, and
mm,
it really angers me that this is how the world is, because I would hope that it is, at least I try to conduct myself in a way that I am fair to everyone else and don't have to resort to manipulation of any
mm,
kinds. Forget about
mm,
mass media. And if the only way of say uh, consolidating power is through manipulation of mass media, then it
mm,
really saddens me because that means there's no news that I can rely on. And
mm.
at the
But I
end,
mean,
it's just a moot point.
but I think like being aware of that is the first point, right? So I think now we both are aware of it, like how media can influence you to
Yep.
certain facts and interpretations, right?
Yep.
So my question is like this book was a rather heavy book, okay?
Yep.
Like for people who are actually into reading, and let's say like you have someone whom you would like to make aware that, hey, look, like media is doing something,
Mm.
what kind of book would you register that person to make aware of this kind of stuff?
Can you say the question again in a different way? I don't really understand what you want to say.
Like we are now aware of this thing, right?
Yep.
Like of
Yep.
the media propagandizing stuff,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
And I mean, like there are a lot of other people who are not aware of it. I can imagine, right? Because
Yeah.
I was literally not aware of it 1 week
Yeah.
ago. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you would suggest someone a book, that would make him aware or her aware, what kind of books would that be?
Other than
Like
this one.
other than this one, because this was quite heavy, right?
Yeah. I would say 1984 is a good example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, pretty much, right?
yeah,
1994. Yeah.
yeah. I think,
Also Fahrenheit 451, right?
yeah, but I think Fraunhofer 451 is a bit more symbolic in that nature. It's more about not letting people read. But I found that this is about letting people read with the goal of changing their mind, and which is, I think, what
Mm-hmm.
1984 is all about. It's about the party line, and then trying to get all the information about it. It's like
He was also
helping
using a lot of
indoctrination into an
mm,
ideology.
yeah. He was also using a lot of Orwellian words, right?
In the book, right?
Yeah, in manufacturing consent, like
Yeah,
Orwellian's double think.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I mean, uh, you can see that Chomsky is a really well-read person. Even
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen the interview that you sent, but I have seen his interviews on other topics, and then I
Mm-hmm.
have found it like really fascinating. For example, I really like this. Something that I noticed right now is that back in 2015, when I was listening to BBC a lot, they used to report about these ghost towns in China. You know, that China had so many buildings they
Mm-hmm.
were building, and then these were all ghost towns, unoccupied, towns with hospitals and everything in place. And they were really critical about it. They were asking, like, why is the
Mm-hmm.
Chinese government just, you know, help, helping the construction industry in this way? But
Mm-hmm.
now you don't hear those news because turns out those ghost towns were done with a plan that people have actually started living in them, and then they are
Mm-hmm.
spending their future. And these cities are very well planned. And for example, I think
Mm-hmm.
recently I Show Speed went to one of those, and then it's like a futuristic city because it has
Mm-hmm.
everything: super fast trains, well connected, every facilities. And uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think so oftentimes we give media too much credit that is not
Yeah.
necessary at all. And
Yeah.
because, for example, China is seen as an adversarial country to most of the Western media, that it's always represented in a poor light in compared to other
Mm-hmm.
countries, and that is something really interesting that I found. Also,
Mm-hmm.
recently with freedom of speech and so on, for example, in the United States, you see freedom of speech is currently being curbed, that people are being held accountable for whatever they were posting, right? But that's something you associate with a dictatorship, and there has not been so much reporting about it because there's a tacit compliance by the mass media that we follow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's it. It was a fascinating book, fantastic read. Thank you very much, Anup, for joining me. I recommend this book for everyone. I wish that most people are informed about this. Next book is Anup's recommendation. So, Anup, what do you want to recommend?
For the next week, I would like to recommend the book called How to Lie with Statistics by Daryl Huff.
Okay, so we are going to dissect the professionals this time as well. We are dissecting the media. Now we are going to dissect the statisticians. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the book. I read some reviews of it and it looks quite interesting. So thank you very much,
Yep.
everyone. Thank you very much, Anup, for joining. And yeah, it was a great read. See you guys again next week.
See you. Bye.